From Rochester, New York, this is Mad Dog Movies, Episode 4. Welcome to the show. My name is Mike Boas. I'm an animator and super genius.
And I am John Vincent, a filmmaker and even a bigger super genius.
Oh, that's impossible.
Nothing's impossible.
Okay. I think we should talk a little about what we're going to do today. We've got, let's see, we're going to talk a little bit about special makeup effects.
A little bit, and what goes into that. Also, some other indie productions done with the HVX200. Which we mentioned in our earlier podcast.
Yep, it's the camera that John owns we're going to be working with. But to kick things off, I have a couple things that we didn't know.
Uh-oh.
A couple things.
There's only a couple things we didn't know?
Yeah, way back in the first or second episode, we were stumped on Jason and the Argonauts. Who was the actor in Jason and the Argonauts?
I don't remember. What is it?
His name was Todd Armstrong. I looked up his credits, and I still don't remember who Todd Armstrong was. But he was in King Rat, a movie I saw. I did actually see that with George Segal.
Too much time on your hands, Mike.
It was a Japanese prisoner of war camp movie.
Right. That was just on the other day.
Oh, have you seen it?
No, I just passed by. It was on either Turner Classic Movies or one of the other ones just a couple days ago.
Based on a book by James Clavell. Anyway, he was also in episodes of Gunsmoke, Hawaii Five-0, and The Greatest American Hero.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, and Bonnie and Clyde. I couldn't remember how many Oscars. It was nominated for 10 Oscars, and it won 2. One for supporting actress and cinematography. So must have been a tough year. Because, you got Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway and, good director, good screenplay. I don't know what it lost to that year. Well, something to look up for the next episode, find out what it lost to.
Sounds good.
Probably The Graduate or something. So, if someone wanted to make some good latex, mask with hair and blood, and instead of just going out and getting baking powder and putting that on your face, what's the next step up? What do you? I know this is something that you have a lot of experience with, and I watched and took some notes back when you were doing a mask recently. It was interesting.
Yeah, I mean the basic principle. Everything varies depending on who does it and what materials that you have access to. The basic idea is to start off, get your actor, put a bald cap on his head. I mean, I could sit, there's books and books on how to do this, but you can find them. Tom Savini has a couple of books out.
And actually, you should be really careful with these
well, it's very, if you're...
or you should do it with someone who's done it before.
You should, start off slow, do a half head instead of a full head, and et cetera, et cetera. You start off doing an arm. Basically, that's probably the best way of doing it. There's a material called alginate, which is a dental material they use to cast your teeth. That has been used for quite some time. Now, there's certain silicones. I know Smooth On has a silicone mold-making material designed to put right on your skin. Smooth On has you can look them up on the internet. But basically, the idea is to mix up some alginate if you're going to use that, and place it on your arm, let's say your arm. And then over the alginate, before the alginate sets, it's before it starts to get hard, you put a piece of terry cloth and you embed it into the top of the alginate before it sets.
So that gives it some strength?
Gives it some strength, and then you take plaster bandages and you lay those over that. And then the plaster bandages adhere to the terry cloth as well. So everything fits. And then you pour up a plaster positive of your arm. And that is generally used a material called UltraCal 30, which is essentially it's a very hard plaster that doesn't shrink very much. It doesn't expand and contract very much when you heat it up. So that's the very basic principle of that. But what we did, and you could probably go on our websites to see.
I could put it in the podcast feed.
Put it in the podcast feed. Basically what I did for the film that we were working on, we needed there's a dead person that's been sitting in a car for ages that's rotted, and he suddenly wakes up and pulls himself out of the old rusted seat, and he steps out of the car and he goes after somebody. So I had to create this. So what I did was basically the first thing I started off is a sketch. I did a basic sketch of the creature, And, I take that back. My buddy Derek DeVoe.
That's right. He did the sketch.
He did the sketch for me. I told him what I was looking for, and he sent me this really nice sketch we'll put up there.
Sure.
And then from that, we took a life cast. We took a cast of our actor's head. I think his name is Jason, and a full head cast. So, and then the alginate and the plaster and blah blah blah. We did all that. You'll see that on the. It's a lot easier if you could see it.
Boy, I got nervous during that. I mean, he was under that for about 40 minutes, probably.
Well, I don't know quite that long, but he was under there for quite some time, and the only thing you can breathe through is his nose.
Yep. We left the nostrils open, but boy,
Yeah, and then we poured a plaster. We made a plaster copy of his head and shoulders.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I sculpted out our dead hero, and I made the skin all wrinkly and deteriorated. And then from that, what I did was I made another mold. I made a 2-part mold, a front and a half, made out of Ultra Cal, 30 again. And I took that mold apart, and now what I was left with was the plaster head and the 2-part molds of the sculpture. The clay gets tossed. You pull it out and clean it out, and it gets tossed.
Okay.
And so if you're going to make just a mask, if you're just going to make a foam rubber appliance, let's say, the head cast gets locked into position with the other 2 molds. So it's suspended. And you do this through a series of registration keys. And we can get more into detail if people want specific directions on how to do this. It's a very long process. Email us and we can... Either I can describe it to you, or we can direct you to right to places that describe it with photographs. Like I said, Tom Savini's book, he's got 2 books. I forgot which. I think it's his first one. Has some pretty good ideas on how to do things, and he goes through it step by step pretty good.
And you even had a video to refer to for mixing up, was it the latex?
I used, it's called GM foam.
Okay.
Right. If you're just going to do like a foam rubber skin that just pulls over the actor's head. So basically you have three pieces of mold. You have the head cast, and you got the other outside mold parts. Those all lock together. Mm-hmm. And what you have now, you have all this negative space where the clay used to be.
Right.
And what you do is you inject foam rubber, which in itself is quite a complicated process.
Yeah.
You have to have the right temperature. It's quite involved. And you whip up this foam rubber with a bunch of different chemicals. GM foam I've been using for quite some time, and I'm used to it. And you inject it into the mold, and it fills in those negative spaces. And it sets, and you let it sit for a little bit, and it gels. And then you bake it forever, it seems like. But for a head, maybe you bake it for 4 hours or so, 5 hours. And it comes out, and it comes off a soft rubber foam. You pull the foam off off the head cast. You wash it off a little bit so it doesn't stink.
Yep.
You airbrush it, and some paints. I've been using like a silicone-based paint mixtures to paint all these things so that the paint itself is flexible.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, did you have 2 heads? You sculpted.
Well, I did a test skin, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to make some of the head mechanical.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to make the lips snarl back and the eyebrows move up and down more than they normally would. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I made I made a fiberglass copy of the head cast.
That's right. Yeah.
So I basically made a different core. Out of fiberglass, so that the skin fit over the fiberglass, not necessarily over specific over his head.
Right.
And then I made that, and I put teeth on it, and I rigged up cable control parts and radio control parts, so that the eyebrows would go up and down, the lips would snarl in a specific way, and the actor would make the jaw go up and down, of course. Mm-hmm. Relatively simple stuff.
It's interesting watching you do all this and helping you out, because I read about it in Fangoria and all these other, magazines and books over the years, and I'd seen a lot of, behind-the-scenes shows, going behind the scenes of Star Wars or American Werewolf in London and that sort of thing. But until we were actually doing it, there were things that, it never occurred to me that you have to do that. And there were these little things about it that surprised me. And, you mentioned registration and how to do registration keys so that so the front half of the head will hook up with the back half of the head in the correct way, and it's wow. Okay.
Well, yeah, and for instance, one of the and you don't even think about it till you actually have to sit there and do it.
Yeah.
But you have to create a clay wall because you do one half of a mold at a time.
Yeah, you can't do the whole
So you got a sculpture, and you create a clay wall that runs halfway up the creature. Mm-hmm. Now that clay wall has to be as perpendicular to the sculpture as you can get, and it's a lot harder than it sounds.
Right, because it's
you have
all
to get a really
well,
you have to get it flat, and you have to have as much of a 90-degree angle to the sculpture where the two things meet as possible, because if you don't, when you make your molds, one side of the mold or the other is going to be something less than 90 degrees and become very, very weak and easy to crack.
Right.
It's hard to, it might be hard to visualize. But if you have something that's, off a little, if it's more of a point, more of a triangle as opposed to a right angle, that point is going to be able to crack a lot easier. And so there's all these little things that you're only going to be able to get through and learn by doing it.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things that I've always been very interested in and thought, wow, maybe I could help someone out with, someday. And it was really cool to help you with that, and we'll probably do some more in the future.
Well, we have the big creature, which is slightly different, but
it's not an appliance for someone to wear, but it is a creature that you're going to use GM foam on that. Or?
I think we're going to switch to a silicone skin.
Okay.
For the creature for the Lovecraft film.
Yeah.
It's very Cthulhu-like. We talked about that before in our other podcast, and that's going to be about 4 feet tall.
Right.
And it's basically a big shaft.
Have you worked? Okay. Have you worked with silicone before?
Very little bit.
Yeah.
I have worked very little bit with silicone, but it's very popular.
It has a different texture than latex.
Well, it's translucent.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm using it for this is that the creature is supposed to look like something that's been lives underwater in the dark.
Right.
So I kind of want to have that milky white, translucent feel with veins, and you can kind of see through it to see the stuff underneath it.
Mm-hmm. How do you get? You say it's translucent. There'll be veins and things under the skin. Do you have to paint the underside of it?
Paint the inside of it. Yeah,
nice.
You create the skin, and then you paint the back of it.
Yeah.
The inside of it, and then you'll see it through the skin. So that's what we're going. Kind of jellyfish type of looking thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The other day, John, you sent me an email about a thread over at the DVX user forums.
I did.
And are you active over there? Do you post a lot, or you just read a lot of stuff?
I read a lot. I'm signed on. I go into the forums. I've asked a couple of questions, but I like the site because it offers a lot of information, and a lot of the questions I normally would ask, a lot of people have already asked, and it's helped me quite a bit figuring out the HVX200, and it also has other cameras. It has for a bunch of other digital video units.
When I first heard about the forum, it's like DVX. I don't even know what that means. It's not for me. But what DVX just means digital video, or?
Well, I think the HVX200 was the one Panasonic came out with originally, and right. I'm guessing on this, but that's what it started off, and that was the first camera that people really jumped on, which was like, wow, this is a great independent film type of camera.
Mm-hmm. All right, and because you've got the Panasonic HVX, you're always looking out for other people that are using it. And there was someone that posted.
There was the headline on there says HVX200 feature sold to Lionsgate, which I thought was pretty interesting. I thought we mentioned that. Give that a plug.
Right. Adam Albrandt is his name. Is the director. I guess he's the writer-director of a movie called Sight, which will be coming out on DVD in May from Lionsgate. Sounds like a fun plot. It has a young man named Jeffrey struggling with the ability to see spirits of the dead. So he's got psychic abilities, and he finds another girl, Dana, who shares his curse. And then hilarity ensues. He is then violently assaulted, and Dana disappears, and Jeffrey must find out who or what was responsible. So, shot, the HVX200 is HD. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of result he got with it.
I'd like to see it. Maybe if he ends up listening to this, if I could get a screener, we can get a screener copy of it. That'd be fantastic. But I'm very curious, and because this is what we're shooting our film on, this exact camera.
The release itself is a standard definition DVD release, but it'll be 16:9 enhanced widescreen, which means if you've got a widescreen TV, it'll fill the screen, but it'll be standard definition. So, but by shooting in HD, it gives you the chance down the road of doing in HD.
The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is what the original format that you're shooting on.
Right.
If it's not film, and again, I am a big film guy, but if it's not film and you're trying to make a small independent feature and you don't have a whole lot of money, this camera is the best that I've seen out there for doing this. You can shoot DVC Pro HD, which is a codex, which is the format that it shoots. And I've been pretty impressive. The only negative things I have to say about it is the fact that there's a little bit of noise in the image. But I mean, I've shot Super 16 and Standard 16 and Super 8, and the grain on those sometimes are just like baseballs anyway. So to me, it's not such a big deal. I know Sony has a new camera out that's, I think, going head-to-head with the HVX200. I haven't seen too much footage. I heard that looks pretty nice. Not much noise on it. But I still think the format I have trouble with, which is basically an MPEG, a version of an MPEG compression format.
Right.
Which essentially takes a group of frames and takes all the information from all the frames and does an average. And
they call it temporal compression.
Okay.
Because it's not just compressing a single image one at a time. It's compressing groups of images. I don't know if you've heard horror stories about editing, or it's just...
Well, I've heard more horror stories with trying to do some really good green screen and blue screen effects. Transitions, it's an issue. And motion is an issue.
Right, camera movement, if you're whipping it around.
The image breaks up. If you have a lot of things, even if the camera's standing still, the action in the camera, if it's moving, tends to break up a little bit. And the reason I like the HVX200, every frame has its own compression, its own bit of information.
Right.
So it doesn't do that. It takes up more space.
Yeah.
An HDV camera, you can shoot on mini DV tapes.
Yeah. And hours worth of stuff, probably.
Yeah, and if you're not moving stuff around, I mean, if you did single frames, if you took a frame of the HVX200 and you took a frame of the new Sony EX camera, the exact name escapes me for now.
They're all numbers and X's.
There's so many of them that that they're coming out. But if you take the side by side, the Sony's going to look a little bit better. It's going to look sharper. There's not going to be as much noise. The trouble is when you start having that action, things start moving around, camera moves, people move, you're going to see that break down a little bit.
I would think HDV would be good for documentary, for a lot of talking heads.
Yeah, it is. I think so. I think that'd probably be a good use for the camera. I'm not knocking that system. It's just for me, if I want to, because we're going to do blue screen for this, we're going to do creature stuff, and it's pretty important.
Yeah.
To your compression is a big issue when you're doing green screen. We're going to composite a creature that has a lot of, there's going to be a lot of movement going on, and we don't want it to look like a green screen, as opposed to a chroma key used to look, And
now, I was reading in the last Millimeter magazine. It was the producer of the No End in Sight, which was just nominated for an Academy Award documentary about the Iraq War.
Right.
He had mentioned that they'd shoot on a variety of formats, but they did shoot some on HVX, the HVX200, and it was they did some interviews and some other footage, and they were using the 8 gig P2 cards.
Yeah.
This is before they had the 16, or what do they have?
They have the
now?
32 gigs now.
Yeah, and he mentioned that he liked it, but it was frustrating because of the style of shooting they were doing, having to swap out the cards every 8 minutes. They were getting 8 minutes of footage the way they were doing it. Now, that's one way to do it, but we were thinking of doing it a different way.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're doing. One thing you can do, depending on the software, if you're shooting, depending on the format you're shooting with the camera, you can record directly to a computer, even the HD stuff, depending on the software. And actually, there's a lot of information about this on dvxuser.com. They talk about different things that are, I know you can Final Cut Pro, I believe you can go in there and record from FireWire into the computer. Not everything. Another advantage.
So you're letting Final Cut Pro do the work and grab the files.
It grabs the image, but you're unable to shoot high speed when you're doing that. For instance, one of the reasons I bought the HVX200 is the fact that it has variable frame rates. There's a number of frame rates, between 12 and 60 frames. So we can do slow motion, we can speed up motion relatively simply with shooting at 72
right.
progressive.
But you also don't have to limit yourself to 8 minutes.
7200 progressive.
If you're shooting not high speed, what? If you're shooting, you pick your frames, instead of flagging frames. You know better than I do.
Basically, there's a couple of ways of recording. There's the native mode,
right,
which doesn't flag the frames. It actually it only frames that it records to memory are the actual frames that you're going to be using. For instance, if you're shooting 24 frames a second, that's all that it's going to be recording to the disk, to the
60
card.
Or
there's 60, instead of 60 interlaced.
Right.
It's going to grab out those 24 progressive frames and line them all up next to each other like a film.
That'll save you some file space, so you can get more than 8 minutes.
It saves you that, and it's also it's easier for doing transitions, and it speeds things up a bit. As far as I'm concerned, it does.
What do you get, like 20 minutes that way, or?
Yeah, because you're not recording all the other extra information you're not going to use. You can do 20. Let's see here. The 720, 24 progressive native, and the 30 progressive native, and then you can do the 1080, 24 progressive A, I think it is. Which is different. Now,
when he says, and for the listeners, 720 means the height of the screen, 720 pixels. There's basically two competing formats. You got your 1080 height, which is 1920 pixels wide by 1080 high, and the smaller format is 1280 wide by 720 high.
Yeah.
And the difference right now is that there's 1080 interlaced, which looks really good, and then there's 720 progressive, which is looking a little more like film. And things are moving towards 1080p.
Yeah, and the advantage of the HVX is that it does 1080 progressive, 24 progressive, but it doesn't do it in native form. What it does is it shoots. You can't shoot the slow motion with it in the 1080 mode. That's the only issue, but.
That'll be the next camera.
But the 1080 images are really nice. The compression is really good, and you get some really beautiful stuff shooting the 1080 24 PA, progressive A, and bringing that in. And what that basically does, that takes an interlaced image and then it de-interlaces it.
Oh, okay.
As opposed to shooting 720 native. You just get the frame. There's no de-interlacing. It's just like a film.
Right.
Shooting with a film. But there tends to be a little bit less noise.
With which one?
Which the 1080 progressive, and there tends to be a little bit better image, a little bit better image quality.
Really?
Yeah, well, it takes up a lot more space.
Yeah.
But it depends. Like, so for instance, what we're going to be doing for our feature is most likely anything that doesn't have anything to do with slow motion. Or we have to shoot high speed. So, most of the live action stuff we're going to be shooting is going to be in the 24.
Yep.
The 1080 24.
Okay, so we are going 1080 20, not 720 with.
Right, but we're going to go 720 for all the visual effects stuff because a lot of the puppet stuff has got to be shot high speed.
Yeah.
And it's going to be composited.
So when it comes time to edit this, can you put them both in the same timeline, the two different formats?
Yeah. We're going to up-res the 720 to 1080 is what we're going to end up doing for that. But you got to remember too, and this is hard to describe, but even though we're only shooting 720, a lot of the visual effects shots, say if we're shooting a miniature of the creature, we have the creature film the entire frame of the 720 image. And then within After Effects, the creature actually gets shrunk down because he may be in the distance a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So we're actually, by shrinking the image,
you increase the resolution.
You're increasing the resolution essentially and you're making it match more with the 1080. So we're going to be doing things like that.
One of my many websites I have at maddogmovies.com is the Ominous Events area. You can go to that by going to maddogmovies.com and clicking on the link. And Ominous Events is a database that I worked up. It's got probably about 150 different conventions and film festivals related to the horror and fantasy genre. So
scary.
It is very spooky. And this started off a couple of years ago because I went through the internet looking for places to send my Jason cartoon that I had done, my Friday the 13th cartoon, and then later my Lovecraft cartoon. And there was no, you can go to filmfestival.com and look up stuff, or you can go to Google and look up stuff, but there was no real database of just horror film festivals. And I was also interested in conventions. I communicate with other festival type people. I got some emails the other day from California, the Shriek Fest. I got emails from Greg Ropp at the Erie Horror Film Festival, a place I attended. Who else did I talk to? I talked to someone in Buenos Aires. I talked to someone in, I think, Rio de Janeiro, South Africa.
Wow.
So it's not just American film festivals and conventions that are contacting me now, which is pretty cool. So I like to keep it international, and they contribute their updated information. I need as much help from those people as I can because it's too much for me to just go and search out these new places all myself. So it's a new relaunch of the website. And now other filmmakers like ourselves can see what's going on or what conventions are going on to go and see other independent productions being screened. So if you want to visit that, that's either ominous-events.com or maddogmovies.com. Just look for the Ominous Events link.
Now, we have a film festival here in Rochester as well. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, in the future episodes, we probably wanted to maybe get someone on here from the Rochester High Falls International Film Festival. I'm working on their website, actually. In the past, it's been the High Falls Film Festival and the Rochester International Film Festival, and they're combining forces. So there'll be short screenings from the Movies on a Shoestring people, and there'll also be big productions we're working on. They like to get feature films to premiere here that maybe end up down the road becoming Oscar nominations. I remember No Man's Land and a few other ones. Kinsey, Sideways, they played at the High Falls Festival before they went out to main theaters. And it was pretty cool for people in Rochester to come out and maybe meet some of the filmmakers or ask them questions. That'll be coming up in last week in April, I think. That crossover week between April and May is the Rochester High Falls International Film Festival.
Looking forward to that.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking off air about some people we had coming up that we want to do interviews with.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this before, but yeah, Matt Ehlers is going to be coming in, a filmmaker who has done a number of projects. I think 3 of his films made it to 3 of his short films, short comedies, were in Sundance.
Yep.
And he finished a film called Smoking Laws.
Right.
And which is he's just
very
doing
funny.
Which I helped out with, and he's going to be here hopefully to talk about that, and then I think we'll talk to him about that music question we had earlier. Mm-hmm. I think Nora Brown is going to be
Nora with the
us.
Rochester Finger Lakes Film Office.
Right, and she's also first AD, which is a first assistant director or production manager, unit manager, all kinds of stuff she's done. And been around the business for quite some time and is a wealth of information. So if there's any questions that you have about production in terms of assistant directing, in terms of production, script supervising, any of those types of questions.
Getting location clearances.
Any of that stuff. Equipment, where to go to get equipment rental and what that entails. Mm-hmm. Any of those questions, please email us, and we'll have those ready for when Nora Brown. Her name used to be Nora Green.
Yes, now she's green, brown, black, and
I
blue.
call her Nora Earth Tones. But she's one of my favorite people, so she'll be in to talk. So if any of those questions, send them along, and then we'll discuss that stuff when she is here. And we'll have other guests coming in. There's Robert Manganelli, who wrote and directed the film After Image, with John Mellencamp and Louise Fletcher. We're working on his latest film, and he's going to be joining us at some point, maybe over the phone, or if he's in town, we'll have him come into the studio. And there'll be a number of others.
Cool. Well, if you want to email us, that's feedback@maddogmovies.com. Or if you want to just visit our blog and we'll put up some links for our show notes, and that's at maddogmovies.com/podcast. And then there's your website.
PhilRoseFilms.com, PhilRoseFilms.com.
And that does it. And we'll talk to you next time.
Adios.
Music for this episode provided by Keith Handy. Visit him at keithhandy.com.